So that's really where I got involved and started meeting with a lot of entrepreneurs and just wanted to go try it for myself.
Right. And so, you were just kind of like, quote unquote, like stuck there at the time, and you were like, I want to do a startup, I want to do this, and that was where, you had to, or you're like, all things being considered, did you feel like, hey, it's just as good as any other town?
Yeah, I mean, it had a lot of things going for it. Like the mayor of the city was a former entrepreneur, and there was a number of leaders in the city that were promoting it. One guy had moved out from New York City and had kind of created this little ecosystem downtown with coffee shops and stuff. And so, there was like just a very small but clear startup scene. And I also, would put on startup events and stuff. So to some degree, I was kind of helping to promote it myself. I mean, it had enough of the roots to get things going. And so.
But eventually you did kind of make your way here.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think when I look at it or kind of think about like regional ecosystems is like you need to connect with the benefits and, the capabilities of the area. And, Louisville, the Midwest, like every city has its kind of like key aspects that it offers, but software development is definitely not, not the key area in Kentucky.
So there's a lot to be said about that, though. I mean, I've seen a lot of like medical stuff like pop up in Boston, for example, or biotech in general. And it seems, considering the amount of talent there is in like biology, medical research, Genetech is over there. I kind of feel like that's not necessarily a bad place at all to actually like set up that kind of startup. But a lot of plays, software, being kind of the chief one of them. Yeah, it seems like there's more resources like here around San Francisco to do it.
Yeah, definitely in like the Pureplay software stuff. I mean, in Louisville, or in Kentucky, there's Yum brands, so there's a lot of fast food stuff, and there are entrepreneurs. Like there's a really cool product called the Fresh Fry, which is this bag that you put in the oil, and it like removes all the toxins from the oil so you can keep reusing it. And it's like, that's a clear product where you could scale rapidly, and similar to software.
In Kentucky.
Yeah, because like, I mean, you could put that in every Taco Bell. So, those are the things where it's like, if you match with the area, you can still have the scale that, people are attracted to here for software.
But so what about like just, let's say you have some random idea and you're looking somewhere cheaper than San Francisco, or you're stuck somewhere other than San Francisco, like what would you seek out? What are some of the things you would recommend people kind of look for or try to build, or try to skip town if wherever they are doesn't really have like that basic infrastructure or networking? What is it? People always talk about money, they talk about talent, talk about stuff like that. Has that been your experience, that this is kind of a prime consideration when you're just starting?
To some degree, I think people fall back on the crutch of like, oh, there's not enough money here. And I definitely heard a lot that in the Midwest, where it's like, oh, we need to like build more angel networks, get more people involved. But like you would meet, very successful entrepreneurs that, the money seems to find them. So I don't really like to kind of, say that's a crutch. I mean, yes, it's true. Silicon Valley has so much excess funds that like, crazier ideas kind of.
Do you feel like something that, it's very, very true that something that would never get funded outside Silicon Valley is easier to get funded in Silicon Valley? Or do you feel like there's, if you have a bad idea, it's not going to get funded anywhere?
No, I think you can get bad ideas funded more easily here, just, in kind of the boom cycle. But, I mean, over time, bad ideas are bad ideas. So I think it kind of evens out. In my mind, though, like, I look at, the challenge of finding access to that capital. It seems like in the Midwest or other areas, like the business plan, like the numbers seem to kind of play the story stronger than maybe out here the pitch and relationships do.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then I guess here it's more of an opposite thing, right? It's not like false positives. It's also the false negatives you would get, if you're out in the middle of the country where people don't recognize the potential of your idea, or are too kind of they're a bit leery of going into like a big play or making a big bet on something. Whereas it might be easier to get those kind of plays funded here, right? That's more what that's like. So what else? we talked customer, we talked money. What about like stuff like talent, ecosystem, competition, stuff like that? Do you feel like that was kind of very good or missing in kind of your experience, building something in Kentucky? Or?
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, the talent was, more of a struggle to find.
But people build distributed now, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. You can balance that out. The one thing that is kind of cool about, any of these towns is that there's more of a civic kind of connection to like,
right.
Making small business work and stuff. I don't know, it's the underdog story.
Sure.
And so you can, I think, connect with more people in different areas, partly because it's just smaller, but also because I think there's just more commonality to like make it succeed. And so that has ways of finding interesting talent that like would constantly surprise me. I would meet people in Kentucky that just never would have thought were there, through the university or through relationships. And so it's definitely there. It's just you got to do a little bit more effort to find it.
Right. So the other one I've mentioned that's kind of missing from a lot of places that have capital, that have talent, that have customers. Places like London, for example, and that's kind of an often example of like, why isn't there like a bigger startup scene in London? And the argument I've heard is that it's lacking that competition. Even if there is startups, they're kind of like, there's only one startup doing one thing, and there isn't like somebody that you can kind of be like, oh, I really want to get those guys or steal in place from, or steal ideas from. There isn't like that kind of energy. Do you feel like that's something that was actually missing or was actually pretty good?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if the competition.
Did you see yourself
locally,
kind of like on a national level already?
Yeah,
right away.
I think so. I mean, when you start to have to recruit distributed teams, I think naturally you're already thinking
right.
kind of national. And we had, early customers that were on the coast and stuff.
Right.
So it definitely.
And so you could identify, I guess, with those competitors. I guess it's something coming from Europe, which is kind of really weird. And now that I think about it out loud, is you kind of always look for national competitors. You never think of yourself of like, oh, I'm doing LinkedIn for France, so I'm competing against like LinkedIn. You always think of like, oh, I hope there isn't another LinkedIn for France shop coming out. But you're right, this maybe just like be a weird European thing that's happening, but that most kind of American startups, wherever they're based out of in the US, think already about the national market or the global market even.
Yeah, I mean, in Kentucky, one of the other, or Louisville, the other fairly successful software startups there that got started when I was there is a enterprise mobile messaging platform.
Okay, so close enough to what you were doing with Roobiq.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sure they consider Slack, obviously a competitor, but they have like their niche in the market, and so they have been able to kind of take advantage of the local local companies and stuff, right. And kind of own that.
But it didn't you didn't have this kind of pressure to like, emulate them or to like take inspiration from them or compete with them for talent or anything of the sort?
Definitely did. I mean, I think
it's a bit of a driver, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a benefit of like when there are overlapping companies that talent just coalesces, and it is harder unless you've got something feeding it. So.
And so, what's kind of the biggest changes, I guess, one of the things that shocked me kind of coming over from Boston to here, to say nothing of coming from Europe to here, was just the pace. It seemed like stuff goes a lot faster. Did you have a similar experience where like,
yeah.
It's hard to describe even, because like people are like, what do you mean you do longer hours? I'm like, no, it's just kind of more frenetic. It's just this weird kind of, thing. It seemed like things do go a lot faster here, right?
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, there's definitely a benefit to being a little bit more detached in terms of like the focus you can have, but you can also get lulled into just a slower pace. I mean, here, it's not just like direct competition that drives it, having competitors at your doorstep, but I think it's just seeing other companies and friends that are like, out there pushing the limits on whatever they're doing in a totally different category, and that seems to create this faster pace.
Yeah, maybe that's really the root, right? It's not necessarily competition per se, but more that emulation, that pace, right? That the Valley is really good at driving for whatever reason, because I go to like, it's not California, because I go to places like LA, and it's not as fast moving. For better or worse. I'm not saying that fast moving is the absolute thing you should aspire to, but it's pretty intrinsic, I think, to how our startups are done here, right? That speed. What else kind of shocked you? So you're kind of you're an angel pad. You're plugged in. What are some of the biggest changes, right, between what you were doing before and doing that here?
Yeah, I think the other kind of major change is because of that faster pace is that there kind of limits you on how much you can kind of get involved more civically, and so that's definitely seems to be one of the disadvantages. I mean, you could argue everything else you do could be distracting to the startup at hand, but that was one of the benefits I liked, and I see that all over the country, that there's a little bit more engagement from the business sector locally, civically. So.
Yeah, here it kind of feels like the startup world in many ways kind of lives like superimposed with the real city underneath, quote unquote, the real city, like the actual city underneath. It doesn't feel that tied into a lot of culture. I mean, it's funny because you go to like coffee shop and it takes Square and you're like, oh, Square, they're just down the block, but that's not really like actual involvement in the city in the way that those places can really be part of the ecosystem. I remember, in much smaller markets like Boston or Paris or London, like this was much more intertwined, right, with their economic policy, with politics, with job creation. In a way, here it kind of feels very disconnected, right? And it feels like people do their own company, and that's kind of it, right? They don't really interact with much of the rest of the ecosystem.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of designed that way with all these perks and stuff, and like lunches that are
productive.
I mean, it's funny, it's like everyone is in this one place, but the actual direct mixing that happens day to day is a lot more limited than it could be because of the these kind of silos that have formed. So.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's its own kind of superimposed network, but you don't really have a lot of chance meetings, like the new meetings. You're gonna run into somebody on the street or at a restaurant or whatever. But have you met like fellow entrepreneurs or like investors like just randomly at a coffee shop? Have you struck up a conversation? I feel like that doesn't happen in a way that it happened in some of the smaller markets.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has. I mean, I've run into people at like gyms and stuff like.
Okay, so maybe I'm just bad at networking.
Well, maybe it's not active, but I mean, you put enough people in the same place. I mean, it's bad.
But then famously, I once, I walked past Paul Graham. And like everybody that was talking to was like, no, we gotta say hi. And I was like, what's happening? And apparently just like, so I'm really that bad at like recognizing people and like networking. So maybe it's just me. No, that makes sense. So, if you had to do it again, having some context now and having the experience, would you go and set up a company somewhere else? Because, it's cheaper and more involved and, it's not that bad from a talent standpoint. Or would you like absolutely come and do it here?
No, I mean, I think there are trade-offs, and if the company kind of had the right fit with the regional ecosystem, the talent and everything was there, and it kind of made sense. Like there was a clear way that this company would scale where it's at. I would definitely do it.
Right. You just got to figure out the right location for your industry, I guess. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you say that. I mean, I think I could see how it works, but that's been kind of the economic development plan for much of Europe, where they have those kind of like competitivity zones, they call them, where they like, well, this area has a lot of like car manufacturers, so why don't we like create some like car startups here, and we have some laboratories that, like work on like research on cars. And it hasn't really worked that well as far as I can tell. I mean, definitely on the job creation standpoint, industrial job creation, it seems to be okay, but how much of it is from actual startups innovating and creating jobs, it's a bit more murky. But it doesn't really seem to work that well as the example that you were mentioning about, like if you're doing stuff about fast foods, might as well go into a place that has a lot of fast food companies. But that might be more specific to the way business is done in the US, right? It does seem like it's much more likely that a startup, you can get a contract from even a large, kind of company. Whereas, in most other countries, we were talking with the previous guest about China, it's much more built on relationship. In Europe, same thing, you need to have a certain pedigree, to be able to be a vendor for a very, very large company. But maybe it is more accessible, right, to create your startup in a smaller market in the US because, it's doing business is much more like smooth, right, and much more approachable, I guess, in those markets. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. It's possible for any idea to really work. I mean, at the end of the day, I kind of look at it as like, you've got to have hard work, luck, and relationships. So, I mean, in the right ecosystem, you can kind of push those in your favor. But at the end of the day, you got to have that mix, and it can be found anywhere. I think from a software perspective, I definitely see like enterprise software being able to be a lot more distributed because at the end of the day, if every company any, whatever they're doing, they're, running software now. That I think, you can find your early customers. You're probably not like pushing the boundaries of, computer science and what you're building. You're driving business process, and so that works. I mean, Exact Target was in Indianapolis, and $1 billion company, and bought by Salesforce.
There's a few, right? Like Denver has a good string of like enterprise startups, between Boulder and Denver proper. Yeah, you're right. I think enterprise software is starting to distribute a bit because there isn't that focus on like engineering resources, and sales talent now is pretty distributed, and those are usually like kind of the two core things that seems to be in short supply, right, to build companies. And even investors, I think, are really warming up to like decentralizing a lot of that stuff away from Silicon Valley, since the prices have been getting so high here. So that makes sense. Yeah, it is changing. It is changing. I wonder, we'll actually, everybody's trying to make like their own Silicon Beach, Silicon Alley, Silicon whatever. I wonder if that, that we'll actually like get to see that happen in the next 10 years, because it does seem like now it's not just, a bunch of like smaller cities, like, or smaller startup cities, clawing at Silicon Valley. There's also Silicon Valley saying like, we don't want to have every company here. We don't want to have all the people and all the deals and all the ideas happening all in this one place, as long as the VCs get the money, and I don't think they care if you're headquartered, necessarily if you're headquartered in Seattle versus San Francisco versus somewhere else at this point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, internationally, bullish around Israel and China. I mean, because a lot of just, military science, engineering work happens there, and that just feeds, a lot of the talent that can, go into the companies. And I mean, China, it's just kind of limitless when you look at it. So, I definitely quite bullish on those. But, looking at the cities in the U.S., I get a little skeptical when I hear, let's make our Silicon X, just because you really can't reproduce it.
What's the name for Louisville? Like, what's Silicon for Louisville? Do they have one?
No, I didn't have.
They should make one.
Didn't have. No.
Silicon barbecue or something.
That would be very controversial.
Oh, really? Oh, I see. Okay, I'm stepping into
Texas.
I see. Yeah, you could claim it first. That's how it works. Cool. Well, thanks a bunch, man.